The detention block was cold and gray. Metal walls stretched in every direction, and the air felt thin. Captain Daniel Hayes walked down the long corridor with heavy boots that made loud sounds on the floor. The guards behind him did not speak. They knew why he was here, and they did not like it. The station held many prisoners now. After 3 years of war, the human forces had finally beaten back the Valorians. The alien species that had killed millions of people was now locked away in cells. The victory felt hollow to Daniel, but he kept that feeling to himself. Cell 7 was at the end of the corridor. Daniel stopped in front of the thick glass wall and looked inside. What he saw surprised him, though he tried not to show it. Queen Shelvanus sat in the corner of her cell. Her body was massive, much larger than a human, with 4 arms folded against her sides. Her skin was covered in patterns of blue and silver that shimmered under the lights. At least, they used to shimmer. Now the color was fading. Her skin looked dull and cracked, like a broken mirror that had lost its shine. The Valorian queen had ruled an empire. She controlled 8 star systems. Her fleets had destroyed entire colonies. Mothers and fathers and children had died because of her commands. Humans called her a monster, a demon, evil itself. Now she sat alone in a metal box with nothing but her thoughts and her regrets. Daniel pressed his hand against the glass. The guards immediately stepped forward, ready to stop him. He held up his other hand to show he meant no harm. The queen did not move. Her large eyes, which were black and empty like the space between stars, did not look at him. She simply sat there, broken and hollow. Daniel had read her file before coming here. Shelvanus was born 300 years ago by human time. She had been trained since childhood to be a leader. She had never known love or comfort or kindness. She had known only duty, only power, only the need to be strong. War was not new to her. It was her whole life, but she had never lost before. She had never known defeat the way she knew it now. "I am Captain Daniel Hayes," Daniel said to the glass. His voice was calm and steady. "I command the human forces in this sector. I wanted to speak with you." The queen's head turned slowly. Her eyes fixed on Daniel's face. He saw nothing in her gaze. No fear, no anger, just emptiness. "Your people will kill me," Shelvanus said. Her voice was deep and clear, with a slight hiss at the end of each word. She spoke good English, which Daniel already knew from the reports. The Valorians had learned human language long ago, back when they first started attacking human colonies. "I do not know what your people will do," Daniel said. This was the truth. The military leaders wanted her dead. The colonial governments were split. Some wanted to execute her as revenge for the war. Others wanted to keep her imprisoned forever, to make her suffer for what she had done. "Why did you come here?" Shelvanus asked. Daniel thought about how to answer this question. He could have given her a military answer. He could have told her he was studying the enemy. He could have said he was planning something. But he did not lie. He never had. "I wanted to know your name," Daniel said. "Your real name, not your title. Not the name your enemies call you. Your real name." Shelvanus stood up. She was 10 feet tall, maybe taller. Her body was built for power and strength. She walked to the glass wall and looked down at Daniel. He did not step back. He stood his ground and met her gaze. "My people call me Shelva," she said. "When I was young and had not yet become queen, before I learned that power meant being alone, before I learned that strength meant cutting away everything soft and good inside yourself." Daniel felt something shift inside his chest. This was not what he had expected to hear. He had expected anger or pride or even madness. Instead, he heard truth. "The war is over," Daniel said. "Your empire is gone. Your people are scattered. Some have surrendered. Some have fled to places we cannot reach. But the fighting has stopped. Because I lost, Shelvanus said. She turned away from the glass and walked back to her corner. She sat down again, her massive body folding in on itself. Because too many people died, Daniel said. On both sides. Because continuing to fight would only create more death. Because the universe is large enough for both our peoples to live in it without destroying each other. Shelvanus did not respond. She sat in her corner and did not move. Daniel stayed at the glass for a long time. The guards became impatient. One of them eventually stepped forward and told him he needed to leave. Daniel turned away from the cell, but before he walked back down the corridor, he turned one more time to look at Shelvanus. I will come back, he said. I want to know who you really are. Not the queen, not the enemy, just Shelva. I want to know that person. The queen did not look at him, but Daniel saw something change in the way she sat. Something small and almost invisible. It was enough that when Daniel left the detention block that day, he was already thinking about what would come next. He did not know it yet, but the choice he was about to make would change everything. His own people would turn against him. The military would cast him out. His career would end. But something new would begin in that cold cell at the end of a metal corridor. A broken alien queen would find a reason to live. And a human officer would find a reason to be brave in a new and different way. They would both learn that strength was not about power over others. It was about the courage to be different. It was about the strength to choose mercy when everyone around you demanded revenge. The detention block was quiet when Daniel reached the exit. He looked back one more time at the long corridor and the cells that lined it. In one of those cells sat a queen who had lost everything. And in the morning, he would go back and try to help her build something new. Something better. Something that the universe had never seen before. The Colonial Assembly was the largest meeting hall on Station Kepler. Hundreds of people filled the seats. They came from every human colony. They came from every military division. They came from every government office. The room was full of anger. Daniel stood in the center of the floor. All eyes were on him. He could feel the weight of their stares. These were people who had lost families and homes to the Valorians. These were soldiers who had fought in the war. These were leaders who wanted revenge. The Valorian Queen will be kept as a prisoner, Admiral Catherine Price said. She was the military commander for all human forces in this region. She was also very angry. She will be put on trial for war crimes. The court will find her guilty, and then she will be executed. The crowd cheered. They shouted agreement. They wanted blood. They wanted justice. They wanted to see Shelvanus die. Daniel raised his hand and asked to speak. The admiral did not want to let him, but the rules of the assembly said he had the right. She nodded at him with a cold expression. I propose something different, Daniel said. His voice was calm and clear. I propose that we end this war. Not just the fighting, but the cycle of killing that never ends. The room went silent. People stared at him like he had gone insane. She is responsible for millions of deaths, someone shouted from the crowd. My entire family died because of her orders. Her flagship destroyed my colony. Daniel nodded. I know. I have read the reports. I know what the Valorians did. But I also know what we did. We burned Valorian cities. We killed their people. We destroyed their government. We have already won this war. The question now is what we do with that victory. We make her pay, another voice said. Then more voices joined in, all demanding the same thing. They wanted her to suffer. They wanted her to die. Admiral Price stood up. She was a tall woman with dark eyes and a face that showed the strain of 3 years of war. She had lost people too. She had made the hard decisions that sent soldiers into battle knowing some would not come back. "Captain Hayes," she said, "you propose we let her live? This being killed millions of our people. I propose we accept that killing her will not bring back the people we lost," Daniel said. "I propose we choose to be better than our enemies. I propose we build a future that is not built on endless revenge." The room exploded. People stood up and shouted. Some demanded he be arrested. Some called him a traitor. Some said he had lost his mind. Daniel stood in the center of the noise and did not move. Catherine Martinez stood up. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes. Her husband had died in the siege of New Atlanta. Everyone knew her story. Everyone knew her pain. "My husband was a soldier," Catherine said. Her voice was not loud, but the room became quiet to listen. "He died defending our home. He believed that we were fighting for something good. He believed that humans were better than the Valorians because we had compassion. We had the ability to care about each other." She paused and looked across the room at all the people gathered there. "If we execute this queen just to satisfy our anger, then my husband died for nothing," Catherine said. "He died so we could become just like the people we fought against. He died so we could be cruel and heartless. I do not accept that. I will not accept it." Other voices joined hers. Not many at first, but gradually more people stood and spoke. Some said they had lost everything to the war and still believed in mercy. Some said their faith taught them that forgiveness was important. Some simply said that humanity should be better than this. The debate continued for hours. The assembly was divided. Some people would never accept chauvinist living. Some people supported Daniel completely. Most were somewhere in the middle, trying to decide what was right. Finally, the vote was called. Each member of the assembly stood and stated their position. The room was tense. No one knew what the outcome would be. When the final count was announced, Daniel had won by a narrow margin. Chauvinists would be granted asylum and protection under human law. She would live, but she would be watched. She would be restricted. She would exist under constant scrutiny. The admiral did not look at Daniel. She simply walked out of the assembly, her back straight, her jaw tight. Many others followed her, people who believed Daniel had betrayed them. The military leaders who had fought the war felt betrayed. The soldiers who had lost friends and family members felt betrayed. The next morning, Daniel went to the military offices to submit his resignation. He could not stay in the service after what he had done. The military was based on order and hierarchy and following commands. He had gone against orders. He had challenged the command structure. He had chosen his conscience over his career. Admiral Price received him in her office. She did not stand up when he entered. She simply looked at him with disappointment. "You have thrown away your career," she said. "Yes," Daniel said. "I know. You have made enemies of everyone in the military command," she continued. "No one will trust you. No one will want to work with you. You will be an outcast." "I know," Daniel said again. "Then why?" the admiral asked. There was real confusion in her voice. She wanted to understand his choice, even though she did not agree with it. Daniel thought about Chauvinists sitting in her cell. He thought about the emptiness in her eyes. He thought about the moment when she had told him her real name, the name from when she was young and still believed in something good. "Because I believe she can change," Daniel said. "And I believe we can change too. I believe that humans are capable of something more than revenge. I believe that if we choose to be better, then the people who died in this war did not die for nothing." The admiral said nothing. She simply nodded slightly and turned away. Daniel left her office and never came back. That afternoon, the news media reported that Captain Daniel Hayes had resigned from the military. By evening, the story was everywhere. The newspapers called him weak. The television news reports said he was dangerous. People who had known him for years now treated him as an enemy, but Daniel did not stop. He had made his choice, and he would see it through. The war with the Valorians was over. Now, he would fight a different kind of war. He would fight against hatred and revenge and the belief that might made right. He would fight for the idea that two broken species could learn to live together. He would fight for Shelvanus, the broken queen who had lost everything but still deserved a chance at a new life. Daniel moved into a small apartment in the civilian sector of Station Kepler. The walls were thin, and he could hear his neighbors through them. The view from his window showed the industrial part of the station, not the beautiful observation decks. But the rent was cheap, and Daniel no longer had a military salary. For the first weeks, he was completely alone. The media continued to attack him. News programs made jokes about him. Political commentators called him a traitor. Online forums filled with angry people who demanded he be prosecuted for betraying humanity. Former friends crossed the street when they saw him. Officers he had served with for years would not speak to him. At restaurants and shops, people would stare at him with anger in their eyes. Some would spit on the ground near him. Others would shake their heads and walk away. Daniel worked hard to push forward with his plan. He created documents explaining why the accord with the Valorians made sense. He gathered scientific data about cross-species cooperation. He gave interviews to any journalist who would listen, even though most of them were hostile. He proposed plans to the government, only to have them rejected again and again. Then one day, a woman knocked on his apartment door. Her name was Amy Foster, and she was a xenobiologist. She had been studying alien species for 20 years. "I saw your interview last week," Amy said when Daniel opened the door. "I want to help you." Daniel was shocked. "Most people want me dead," he said. "I am not most people," Amy replied. She came inside and sat down at his table. "I have been studying the Valorians for years. Before the war, when we thought they might be willing to negotiate. I know their biology. I know their culture. I know they are not monsters. They are just different from us." Amy spent the next few weeks working with Daniel. She created presentations showing that Valorian and human physiology could coexist in the same environment. She wrote papers explaining that the Valorians had their own philosophy about honor and duty, and that Shelvanus had been taught to value these things from childhood. She argued that changing a species' entire belief system was possible if given time and the right environment. Having Amy's support gave Daniel courage. If one smart scientist believed in him, maybe others would too. Then one morning, Daniel received a message from Lucas Bennett. Lucas had lost his entire family in the attack on Colony 7. His wife and 3 children had died when the Valorian fleet destroyed their home. Most people expected Lucas to hate the Valorians more than anyone. Instead, Lucas wanted to meet with Daniel. They sat in a quiet coffee shop on the station. Lucas looked tired, like a man who had not slept well in a long time. He was thin, and his eyes were red from crying. "I have been thinking about something," Lucas said. "I spent years hating the Valorians. I spent years planning revenge, imagining ways I could make them suffer the way I have suffered. It did not help. It only made me more broken." Daniel listened and said nothing. "I realized something," Lucas continued. "Holding on to hatred is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It only kills you. I had been drinking poison for 3 years. Lucas reached across the table and put his hand on Daniel's arm. "I want to build something instead of destroying something. I want to use my engineering skills to create a place where humans and Valorians can live together. I do not forgive what they did, but I choose not to let it destroy who I am." Daniel felt tears come to his eyes. He had thought he was fighting this battle alone, but he was not. Within a month, other people began to join them. Elena Vasquez was a colony administrator who believed that, Integration was not only possible but necessary for humanity's future. She had experience managing diverse populations and solving complex problems. She volunteered to establish the first integrated settlement. David Kim was a military engineer who had fought in the war. He had seen the destruction up close. But he also believed that humanity should build rather than destroy. And he offered his skills and his time. Rachel Gordon was a teacher who wanted to develop a curriculum for children from both species to learn together. She believed that if humans and Valorians grew up understanding each other, the hatred would eventually die away. Marcus Patterson was a psychologist who had experience treating people with severe trauma. He offered to work with Shelvinus to help her process the incredible loss she had experienced and to learn new ways of thinking and being. The team grew slowly but steadily. They were all outcasts in some way. They were all people who believed in something that others thought was impossible. They were all willing to sacrifice their comfort and their safety to build something new. Daniel moved Shelvinus from the detention cell to a secure facility where she had more space. He hired guards who were kind but firm, people who respected her as a being even though they were watching her carefully. He brought in Amy Foster to conduct health examinations. He brought in Marcus Patterson to begin their first counseling sessions. One day, Shelvinus asked Daniel to tell her about the people who were helping him. Daniel described each person and explained why they had chosen to join this impossible project. When he finished, Shelvinus was silent for a long time. "Why do they believe in this?" Shelvinus asked. "Why do they believe in me?" "Because they believe that anyone can change," Daniel said. "Because they believe that the future is more important than the past. Because they have seen what hatred creates, and they want to create something different." Shelvinus looked at Daniel with those big black eyes that had once seemed so empty. Something was different now. There was a spark of something in them. Not hope, exactly, but maybe the beginning of hope. "I will try," Shelvinus said. "I will try to be what you all believe I can be." The Accord community was officially established on the colony of New Hope, a place that had been abandoned during the war. Elena Vasquez negotiated with the government to grant them use of the facilities. Daniel and his team worked together to create something that had never existed before in human history. A place where an enemy could become something more. A place where a broken queen could learn to be human. Or at least, learn to be something that humanity could understand and respect and work alongside. The road would not be easy. There would be setbacks and challenges and moments when it seemed like the whole project would fail. But Daniel and his small team of believers had started something that the universe had never seen before. They had chosen to build a bridge between two species that had only known how to destroy each other. They had chosen hope over hatred, and they would not stop until they had changed the future. 5 years passed. The Accord community had grown from a single abandoned facility into something that surprised everyone, including the people who built it. Shelvinus had transformed in ways that Daniel could not have predicted. She still had her massive frame and her alien appearance, but something inside her had changed completely. She had spent thousands of hours in counseling with Marcus Patterson, working through the trauma of her defeat and learning new ways to think about power and leadership. Amy Foster had worked with Shelvinus on developing a shared language for both species to communicate better. They created new words and expressions that had no meaning in either human or Valorian speech but existed in the space between them. These new words represented ideas that neither species had fully understood before meeting each other. Shelvinus had begun to share Valorian knowledge with human scientists. She explained advanced mathematical concepts that the Valorians had developed over centuries of space exploration. She described medical treatments for diseases that humans had not yet discovered cures for. She revealed engineering principles that could make human spacecraft more efficient and more durable. Every discovery came with a story. She would sit in a laboratory with Amy Foster and the research team and explain not just how something worked, but why the Valorians had developed it. She would describe the historical events that led to each innovation. She made knowledge personal rather than abstract. Lucas Bennett had built new structures at the Accord community. He designed resonances that could accommodate both human and Valorian physiology. He created workspaces where both species could collaborate without difficulty. He built educational facilities where children from both species could learn together. His engineering skills, combined with Shelvanus's knowledge, produced something extraordinary. The buildings were beautiful and functional. They used less energy and produced less waste. Within a year, other human colonies wanted the designs. Other settlements wanted the technology. The work that Lucas and Shelvanus created together became a model for how future human and Valorian communities could be built. The children came first to the Accord community schools. Young humans arrived alongside young Valorians, beings who had never known the war. They did not understand why their parents were so angry at each other. They did not understand why some of them were small and fragile, and others were tall and strong. They simply played together and learned together and became friends. Shelvanus often worked in the schools, teaching Valorian history to both human and Valorian children. She would sit in the classroom with her 4 arms and her alien features and tell stories about the Valorian Empire. But she told them differently than she would have before the war. She talked about mistakes her people had made. She talked about how fear had driven them to attack humans. She talked about how strength without compassion was not real strength at all. The children listened to her with fascination. They did not see a monster. They saw a teacher. They saw someone who had learned something important and wanted to share that knowledge. On the 10th anniversary of Daniel's first meeting with Shelvanus in the detention cell, the Universal Peace Summit was held. Leaders and scientists and philosophers from every human colony and every remaining Valorian territory gathered on Station Kepler. The same station where Shelvanus had been imprisoned now hosted the most important meeting in galactic history. Shelvanus was asked to speak. As she stood before hundreds of leaders, she looked different than she had 5 years ago. She stood taller, not in body but in spirit. Her skin had regained much of its shimmer and color. Her eyes were clear and full of intelligence and purpose. "I was taught that strength meant domination," Shelvanus said. Her voice was calm and carried throughout the chamber. "I believed that power came from taking what others had. I believed that the universe was a place where only the strongest survived. I was wrong." She paused and looked across the audience at the humans and the remaining Valorians gathered there. "I have learned something that changed everything," Shelvanus continued. "Strength is not about forcing others into submission. Real strength is the courage to change your mind when you realize you have been wrong. Real strength is accepting defeat and learning from it. Real strength is the ability to work alongside someone you once considered an enemy." She talked about the 5 years at the Accord community. She talked about what she had learned about human culture and human values. She talked about compassion and mercy and the importance of building rather than destroying. "My people have suffered great losses," she said. "We have lost our empire. We have lost our way of life. But we have found something more valuable. We have found the possibility of a future where we work together instead of destroying each other." The reaction was mixed. Some Valorian representatives stood and applauded. Some human leaders nodded their approval. But others sat in silence, still convinced that the Valorians were enemies and always would be. Shelvanus did not seem bothered by the negative reactions. She simply stated the truth as she understood it. And then she sat down. Daniel sat in the audience and watched her speak. He felt proud, but not in the way he had expected to feel. He was not proud because Shelvanus was succeeding in some grand way. He was proud because she was being honest. She was standing before her enemies and her people and admitting that she had been wrong. That took more courage than any battle. After the summit, Daniel and Shelvinus walked together on the observation deck of the station. They looked out at the stars, the same stars that humans and Valorians had fought over for centuries. "I received a message from the remaining Valorian government," Shelvinus said. "They want me to join their leadership council. They want me to help guide my people toward this new future." Daniel was surprised but not shocked. It made sense that Shelvinus would be asked to help lead her people in a new direction. "Will you accept?" he asked. "I do not know yet," Shelvinus said. "What I do know is that I would not have this opportunity if you had not seen something in me when everyone else saw only an enemy. I would not be standing here if you had not been brave enough to be kind." She reached out one of her upper limbs and placed it gently on Daniel's shoulder. It was a gesture she had learned from watching humans, adapted to her own physiology. It meant gratitude and respect and the bond that had formed between them. "Thank you," Shelvinus said. "For everything?" Daniel stood there with her hand on his shoulder, looking out at the stars. He thought about the road they had traveled together, from the cold detention cell to this moment of peace and possibility. It had not been easy. There were still people who hated them both for what they had done. There were still obstacles to overcome and challenges to face. But they had proven one important thing. They had proven that enemies could become allies. They had proven that a broken queen could become a bridge between two species. They had proven that mercy and compassion could be stronger than weapons and hatred. The future was not certain. But for the first time since the war began, the future was full of hope. 10 years after Daniel Hayes knelt before a cell and asked a broken queen for her name, the galaxy was different. The change was not complete. There were still problems and conflicts and people who clung to old hatreds. But something fundamental had shifted. In the way that humans and Valorians understood each other, the Treaty of Accord was signed by representatives from all human colonies and all remaining Valorian territories. It was not a treaty of conquest or surrender. It was a treaty of cooperation. It established trade agreements and scientific partnerships and agreements about how to share disputed worlds. It created a council of two species to address conflicts and make decisions about the future. Shelvinus accepted a position on the council, representing the Valorian people. She worked alongside human leaders to solve problems and build new systems. She was not a queen anymore, not in the old sense. She was something different. She was a bridge between worlds. The Accord community had grown into a network of facilities across multiple star systems. Young humans and young Valorians attended school together. Scientists from both species worked side by side in laboratories, creating medicines and technologies that neither species could have developed alone. Engineers built settlements that reflected the best. Ideas from both cultures. Trade flourished on routes that had once been battlefields. Ships carrying goods and people moved freely between human colonies and Valorian territories. Economic growth created jobs and wealth, which gave people reasons to maintain peace rather than return to war. Elena Vasquez had become the administrator of the entire integrated sector. She oversaw dozens of communities where humans and Valorians lived together. Her work was difficult and sometimes frustrating, but she believed in what they were building. Lucas Bennett had become famous for his engineering designs. Settlements across the galaxy used his buildings. He had trained hundreds of engineers, both human and Valorian, to carry forward the principles he had established. He had married a Valorian scientist named Velkasha, and they had begun exploring what genetic partnerships might be possible between their two species. Amy Foster had become the leading xenobiologist in the known galaxy. Her research into how different species could coexist had revolutionized the way that scientists thought about alien biology. She had published multiple books and had won numerous awards. But she spent much of her time at the Accord community, where it had all started. Marcus Patterson had trained a new generation of counselors to help both humans and Valorians work through trauma and loss. He had published papers on cross-species psychology that were studied in universities across the galaxy. But his greatest satisfaction came from the progress he had seen in his original patient, the broken queen who had slowly learned to rebuild herself. Daniel Hayes did not seek recognition. He worked quietly behind the scenes, facilitating conversations and solving problems. He had turned down offers to join the government and offers to teach at universities. He preferred to remain in the background, doing the work that needed to be done without expecting praise or reward. But on a special day, 10 years after the first meeting, the Accord community held a celebration. Leaders from both species gathered to commemorate the decade of peace and progress. Shelvinus stood before the assembled crowd and began to speak. "I am here because of one human who believed that change was possible when no one else did," Shelvinus said. She looked directly at Daniel, who stood at the back of the crowd. "He saw potential in me when I had lost all hope. He extended friendship when I was his enemy. He believed in a future that everyone said was impossible." She continued speaking, describing the last 10 years and everything that had been accomplished. She talked about the young people growing up in peace instead of war. She talked about the scientific advances that had improved life for both species. She talked about the possibility of a shared future instead of endless conflict. "But the most important thing he taught me," Shelvinus said, "is that true strength comes from the ability to change. True power comes from compassion, not domination. True leadership is about building bridges, not walls." She stepped down from the speaking platform and walked across the room to Daniel. In front of everyone, she knelt down so that her massive form was at his level. It was a gesture of respect and gratitude, something the Valorians rarely did for anyone. Daniel helped her stand, and they embraced. The human captain and the alien queen, former enemies, now friends and partners in building a better future. That evening, Daniel and Shelvinus walked together in the gardens of the Accord community. Humans and Valorians tended the gardens together, creating something beautiful that belonged to both species. "Have you ever regretted your choice?" Shelvinus asked. "Giving up your career to help me?" Daniel thought about the question. He thought about the years of rejection and anger and being treated as an outcast. He thought about the difficulty of building something that everyone said was impossible. "No," he said finally. "I have never regretted it. I regret that we spent so many years fighting. I regret that so many people died in the war. But I do not regret helping you find your way to this place." "I have been thinking about something," Shelvinus said. "The historians are already beginning to write about this period. They are writing about how the war ended and how peace began. Do you know what they are saying was the turning point?" Daniel shook his head. "They are saying it was the moment when you knelt before my cell and asked my name," Shelvinus said. "They are saying that small gesture of respect and recognition changed the course of history." Daniel was surprised by this. He had not thought of that moment as particularly important at the time. He had simply been following his instinct, his belief that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity. "I do not know if that is true," Daniel said. "Maybe history was changing anyway. Maybe circumstances were right for peace. Maybe many things came together to make this possible." "Perhaps," Shelvinus said. "But I know this. In that moment, you saw me not as a queen or an enemy or a monster. You saw me as a person capable of being something other than what I had been taught to be. You saw my potential when I could not see it myself. That single moment of recognition changed everything for me." They walked in silence for a while, through gardens where humans and Valorians worked side by side, growing food and creating beauty together. "What will you do now?" Shelvinus asked. Daniel smiled. I will continue doing what I have been doing. I will work to help this peace last. I will solve problems as they come up. I will try to make sure that future generations remember that we chose this. We chose peace. We chose cooperation. We chose to be better than we had been. As night fell over the Accord community, the lights came on. They illuminated the buildings that Lucas had designed, the laboratories where Amy worked, schools where children from both species learned together. Daniel and Shelvinus stood on a hill and looked down at it all. The galaxy would remember this moment. It would remember a queen and a captain who proved that enemies could become allies. It would remember that compassion was more powerful than weapons. It would remember that the greatest victories were not won on battlefields, but in the quiet moments when someone chose to see another being's humanity and decided to act on that. Recognition. Daniel Hayes had asked Shelvinus for her name, and in doing so, he had changed the future. Not through force or power or dominance, but through simple human kindness and the belief that everyone deserved a chance to be better than they had been. The war between humans and Valorians had ended not with conquest or surrender, but with a queen and a captain standing together, looking out at a future that they had built together from the ruins of the past.